The coffee in my mug had gone completely cold. I hadn't noticed. I was standing at my kitchen counter in my socks, one arm already through my jacket sleeve, car keys jingling in my left hand, when my phone lit up on the counter. I almost didn't look at it. I was already 7 minutes behind schedule, and the drive to my uncle's cabin outside Muskoka takes nearly 2 hours on a good day. But something made me glance down. It was my accountant, Marcus Webb, the man who has handled my father's estate files since before I was old enough to understand what an estate was. Marcus never texts. In 22 years of knowing him, the man has communicated exclusively by phone call, registered mail, and the occasional fax that nobody asked for. So when I saw his name on my screen attached to a text message, my hand froze on my jacket zipper. Natalie, do not get in that car. Call me right now. Your uncle has done something, and if you walk into that cabin tonight, you will lose everything your father left you. I read it 3 times. Then I set my keys down very slowly. The way you set down a glass you realize is cracked. My uncle Raymond had been the one to call me last Thursday. His voice was warm, almost unrecognizable from the flat, clipped way he usually spoke to me. He said he wanted to clear the air, said the last 2 years of legal back and forth over Dad's estate had torn the family apart and he was tired of fighting. He had invited me up to the cabin for a quiet dinner. Just family. Just us working through it like adults. He said he had something he wanted to show me. Documents, he said. Something that would finally make everything make sense. I had believed him. I had actually let myself feel relief. I took my jacket off completely, draped it over the back of the chair, and called Marcus. He answered before the first ring finished. His voice had none of its usual careful professionalism. He sounded like a man who had been awake since 4 in the morning and had been dreading this phone call for every hour of it. Natalie, thank God. Are you still home? I'm still home. Marcus, what is going on? He exhaled. The sound of it made my stomach drop 3 floors. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to stay calm. What I'm about to tell you is going to be very hard to hear. He had been contacted 2 days earlier by a junior associate at a law firm in Barrie. A young woman who had been hired 6 weeks ago and had made the mistake of actually reading the files she was asked to prepare. She had found something in the paperwork that didn't sit right with her. She had done the right thing. She had reached out. Your uncle, Marcus told me, is not planning a reconciliation dinner. He is planning a competency ambush. Raymond had spent the last 4 months working with a private psychiatrist, not a therapist, a forensic psychiatrist, and a lawyer who specialized in estate litigation. The plan was methodical, and it was almost airtight. I would arrive at the cabin. Raymond would have 2 witnesses present, introduced as old friends. There would be a recorded conversation, carefully steered, designed to make me sound confused, erratic, emotionally unstable. They had documentation prepared, a narrative built over 2 years, framing me as someone who had been in psychological decline since my father's death. Because under Ontario estate law, if a beneficiary can be demonstrated to lack the mental capacity to manage a significant inheritance, a family member with standing can apply to have a trustee appointed. That trustee, in the paperwork Raymond's lawyer had already drafted, was Raymond himself. My father had left me just over $800,000 in a registered account, plus the family property in Prince Edward County, a piece of land worth considerably more than that in the current market. Raymond had contested the will from the day it was read. He believed he deserved half. The courts had not agreed with him, so he had found another way. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I didn't plan to. My legs just decided the floor was where we were going. The thing about hearing something like that is that it doesn't feel real at first. It feels like a plot summary of a movie about someone else's life. And then, slowly, like ice water rising from the bottom of a bathtub, the reality of it starts to touch you. And then it touches something else, something older. The last 2 years assembled themselves in front of me in a completely different order. The voicemail my aunt had left me 8 months after Dad died, the one where she said she was worried about me, that I seemed not quite myself and that maybe I should talk to someone. I had thanked her for caring. I had taken it as kindness. The family dinner at Christmas, where Raymond had gently, publicly, mentioned that I had called him on the wrong day twice in a row, the way everyone at the table had looked at me with that particular soft concern that you aim at people you've decided are fragile. I had apologized. I had actually apologized, and then spent a week wondering if I was losing my mind. The time I arrived at my cousin's birthday party on the right day, at the right address, and was told by Raymond at the door that it had been moved, and he had definitely sent me a message. I had never received a message. I had stood on that porch with a bottle of wine in my hand and genuinely questioned whether I had imagined the whole invitation. I had not imagined it. The party had not been moved. He had told everyone I had shown up a week late. I was being written. He had been writing me for 2 years into a character he needed me to be. A woman unraveling, unreliable, a little lost since her father died, not quite capable of handling what she had been left. And I had been so deep inside my own grief that I had handed him the pen. Marcus was still talking. I made myself focus. Natalie, I know this is a lot, but I need to tell you what I think you should do. I'm going to the cabin, I said. Silence. Natalie, I'm going, but I'm not going as the person he thinks he invited. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, tell me what you're thinking. I told him. He tried to talk me out of it for approximately 4 minutes, and then, to his credit, he pivoted and helped me make it better. My first call after I hung up with Marcus was to my doctor's after-hours line. I explained what I needed and why I needed it that night. She was skeptical, and then she was not. She called in a referral to a clinic in Midtown that did urgent psychiatric evaluations for legal purposes. It took me 40 minutes to get there, and 90 minutes inside, but I walked out with a signed, time-stamped document. Clear cognitive function. No signs of psychosis, personality disorder, or impaired judgment. Fully oriented. The evaluating psychiatrist had also noted, unprompted, that I had demonstrated an unusually clear and organized recollection of a complex sequence of events, which was almost funny given the circumstances. I sat in the parking lot and called my cousin Brianna. Brianna is Raymond's daughter. She is 20 years old and she has her father's eyes and none of his cruelty. She had called me 3 weeks ago, out of nowhere, just to check in. At the time, I had thought it was sweet. Now I understood it differently. She had been trying to tell me something without knowing how. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was careful, compressed. Nat, are you on your way up? Not yet. Bri, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly. A long pause. Outside my car window, a streetcar rolled by on its tracks. The city sounded incredibly normal. He's been preparing this for months, hasn't he? I said. It wasn't really a question. She made a sound that was not quite a word. Then she said, very quietly, I found the files on his home office printer 6 weeks ago. I didn't know what to do. Nat, I swear I didn't know how to. I know. It's okay. I'm not calling to blame you. I kept my voice steady. I need one thing from you. Can you do one thing for me tonight? There's a particular kind of courage that 20-year-olds have that the rest of us slowly lose. It's the kind that doesn't calculate consequences before it decides what's right. Brianna had it. Tell me what you need, she said. The cabin sits about 40 minutes north of Bracebridge, off a road that loses cell service around the 2nd kilometer past the turnoff. Raymond had chosen it deliberately. I now understood. It was his property, his terrain, no neighbors within earshot. The nearest OPP detachment was 25 minutes away on a clear day. What Raymond did not know was that I had a satellite communicator clipped inside my coat pocket, the kind backcountry hikers use when they go somewhere without signal. Marcus had driven up separately and was parked at a Tim Hortons in Bracebridge with a copy of the psychiatric evaluation and a very clear phone call already placed to the Ontario Provincial Police Detachment, explaining what was about to happen and why. I had also, in the hour before I left the city, sent a detailed written summary of the entire situation, names, dates, the Barry Associates tip, the documentation Marcus had been forwarded to my own lawyer, to Marcus, and to 2 email addresses that would be time-stamped and sitting in 3 separate inboxes, regardless of what happened to my phone. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror before I turned onto the service road. I did not look like a woman in crisis. I looked like my father's daughter, which is the same thing. The cabin windows were warm and yellow in the dark. Raymond opened the door before I reached the steps. He was wearing that particular expression he reserves for weddings and funerals, the one where he looks like a person who has rehearsed caring. Natalie. He held out his arms. I'm so glad you made it safely. The roads can be rough up here at night. You okay? You look a little pale. The documentation of concern, beginning immediately. I filed it away. I'm fine, I said. The drive was fine. I'm just tired. He made a sound of deep, sorrowful understanding and ushered me inside. The cabin was warm. There was a fire going. The table was set for 4 and there were 2 people I did not recognize seated in the living room. A man in his late 50s with the particular stillness of someone trying to appear casual, and a woman about 10 years younger who had a leather portfolio folder on the cushion beside her. Raymond introduced them as old friends from his golf club, David and Suzanne. David stood up and shook my hand with the careful grip of a person who has been briefed. I smiled at everyone. I accepted the glass of sparkling water Raymond poured for me, the one I watched him pour from a sealed bottle he opened in front of me, which told me he was smarter about the physical evidence than Aurora had been in a story I would not know for another year. I complimented the fire. I asked about the drive from Toronto for David and Suzanne. I was warm and present and entirely unremarkable. Raymond sat across from me and began. He was good at it. I'll give him that. He started with the grief. How hard the last 2 years must have been. How he worried about me living alone in the city. How he had noticed. And he said this with such practiced gentleness that it was almost impressive that I had seemed overwhelmed lately. Scattered. He mentioned the Christmas dinner. He mentioned the birthday party. He mentioned a phone call I had apparently made to my aunt at 2 a.m. in February, in which I had, according to Raymond, seemed confused about what year it was. I have no memory of that phone call. I also have a call log from my phone provider that I had already requested, showing no outgoing call to my aunt's number at 2 a.m. in February, or at any other unusual hour. David leaned forward. He introduced himself properly this time, Dr. David Ashford. He explained that Raymond had reached out to him because he cared about my well-being, that there was no judgment here, that sometimes grief does things to us that we aren't aware of, and that there was absolutely no shame in getting support. Suzanne opened her portfolio folder. I let them go for another 4 minutes. I watched Raymond's performance with a kind of detached clarity I had not expected to feel. He believed, completely, that I was sitting across the table from him, not understanding what was happening. He believed I was the character he had written, the sad, soft, slightly confused daughter who had outlasted her father by 2 years and would not outlast this dinner. I reached into my coat pocket. I placed the psychiatric evaluation on the table. The room changed temperature. I had a full cognitive and psychiatric evaluation completed this evening, I said. Time-stamped at 7:14 p.m. at a clinic in Toronto. You're welcome to review it. It's also been emailed to my lawyer, my accountant, and 2 other parties in the last 2 hours. Raymond's expression did something complicated. Natalie, nobody is suggesting, Dr. Ashford. I turned to look at him directly. I know what a forensic psychiatric evaluation is. I know what a capacity assessment is under Ontario legislation. I know what it's used for in a state litigation. I also know that conducting one under false pretenses, framed as a dinner with friends, without my knowledge or consent, has some significant professional and legal implications for everyone in this room. I paused. I looked up your license number on the CPSO directory on the drive-up. Your registration is current. I'd hate for that to change. The syringe that had been in Dr. Ashford's jacket pocket stayed in his jacket pocket. Suzanne closed the portfolio folder. Raymond stood up. The warmth was gone from his face entirely now, the way a stage set looks after the lights come down. What was underneath was not grief, and it was not concern, and it had probably never been either of those things. You have no idea what you're doing, he said. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. I've known for approximately 6 hours. I want to be precise about that because precision matters right now. I placed my satellite communicator on the table beside the psychiatric evaluation. The green light was solid. Marcus was connected. So was the OPP officer he had been on the phone with for the last 40 minutes, who had been listening to everything since I set the device on the table, which was the part I had not announced out loud. Brianna found the files, I said. Raymond's jaw tightened. She didn't want to. She spent 6 weeks not knowing what to do with them. She's 20 years old and she was trying to protect her father even when her father had stopped deserving it. I want you to remember that about her. Headlights swept across the cabin window. Then another set. Then the particular flash of blue and red that means the conversation is no longer just ours. The OPP constable was professional and thorough. Doctor, Ashford's cooperation was immediate and complete, the way cooperation always is when a person suddenly understands the difference between being an architect of a plan and being a named participant in a fraud. Suzanne, who turned out to be a notary Raymond had retained to witness documents, sat very still and said almost nothing. Raymond did not go quietly. He said things that I will not repeat here, not because they hurt me, but because they didn't, and I think that's worth noting. There was a time in the last 2 years when the sound of his voice expressing disappointment in me would have hollowed me out for a week. Standing in that cabin, watching him say things that were designed to land like wounds, I felt them arrive and dissolve without ever quite touching anything real. Grief had not made me fragile. He had just convinced me it had. Marcus arrived 20 minutes after the OPP. He walked in, looked at the scene, looked at me, and said, You're the most exhausting client I have ever had, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. Brianna was waiting in the car at the end of the service road. She had driven up separately, 2 hours behind me, because I had asked her to stay back until I messaged her, and she had done exactly that. When I walked out to her car and knocked on the window, she looked at me for a long moment and then burst into tears. I got in the passenger seat and let her. We sat there for a while, the two of us, with the dark trees pressing in on either side and the distant sound of official voices drifting out from the cabin. And I thought about my father. He had been a quiet man who loved the Canadian Shield and strong tea and fixing things that were broken. He had left me everything he had not, because he thought I needed it, but because he trusted me with it. He had spent his life building something, and he had handed it to the right person. Raymond had looked at that trust and seen an opportunity. I had looked at it and felt the weight of being loved. Those are not the same thing. They were never going to lead to the same place. The formal charges took another 3 weeks to be laid. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempting to obtain property by false pretenses. There was also a complaint filed with the CPSO regarding Dr. Ashford, which is a separate process and a slower one, but it is moving. The estate files are no longer in dispute. Brianna is finishing her 2nd year at Guelph. She calls me on Sundays now, sometimes just to talk about nothing. We went to the property in Prince Edward County last September for a long weekend. We drank wine on the porch and watched the lake go flat and silver in the evening, and she asked me if I missed having a real family, and I told her the truth, which is that I think real family is the thing you find out who someone is under pressure, and on that measure I was doing just fine. The property stays. The account is mine. And for the first time in 2 years, I wake up in the morning, and nothing in my own mind feels like a place I have to defend. There is a particular kind of silence that lives inside a house where no one is lying to you. I had forgotten what it felt like. I'm learning it again, room by room, and I am not in any hurry. Some inheritances are money, some are land. The one I value most is knowing exactly who I am, and not one person in this story was ever going to take that from me.